All right, and we are live. So, everyone, thank you for tuning into this interview that I'm doing. This is your host, TJ Martinell, host of the Mountain Pass podcast, author, writer, and reporter. And I have with me Jack Napier, who was the narrator for my my book, The Song of Wulfgar, which is now out on Amazon, that you can buy, which you should buy, and then leave a review. So, Jack, thanks for coming on to talk about your work on this book. And so I guess I'm going to start out with just saying how when I first started writing this book, I wrote it with this mindset of I want it to be a book that is going to be read out loud, that it's going to be recited, kind of like old stories. Mm-hmm. And my problem was I had this kind of Seamus Heaney, who's the Irish writer who translated the Beowulf. There's a Beowulf translation of his that he read. And I was like, I want something like that for my book. And when I finished the book, I was thinking, I don't know where I'm going to find a voice like this out there. And then you and I connected sometime last year when we were doing the chats on James Bond. And so it was when I realized, like, this is the voice that was looking for. And so I'm kind of curious, like, so for people who might be wondering, because when I didn't know who you were, where you were from, I didn't even know. I thought you were much older based on your voice. I thought you were this like 50-something-year-old Scotsman.
So I hope I didn't disappoint by my stunning young
looks. No, I just thought it was funny because the accent threw me off. And so I'm curious. I guess we'll start with that. Is what type of what part of the Netherlands are you from, and what type of accent is that? Is it a more general? For example, my accent, people say, is the Cascadian accent. It's very neutral. It's one of the most neutral accents in the world. So what kind of an accent would you be considered to have within your own country?
The weird thing is, even my own countrymen often can't pick where I'm from, because I'm actually from the northeast of the Netherlands, and it's the farmers' province. Everybody always says it's the farmers' province. And we tend to swallow vowels. So there's no A, there's no E, there's no I. It's only syllables, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
So when you have the word shopping, as in, I won't go into Dutch words, but that will be shoppen. Shoppen.
Shopping.
Yeah, kicking, kitten. Things like that. They tend to swallow the vowels. The other ones.
No, yeah, it's. I always find I've become more interested in language and how different accents and how they emphasize different parts of a word as opposed to others. The difference between, for example, Americans pronounce garage, and I think the English call it a garage or garage. Garage, and which is funny because Americans actually pronounce it more originally, like, because it's a French word, garage. And so we pronounce it the way it's supposed to be. We're emphasizing the right part of it. And so I go to different parts of the country, and people immediately know, like, for example, I'm not from the South, right? But they also know I'm not from the New England area, even though, like, that's where my ancestors are from originally. In the Pacific Northwest, we really don't hang on to anything. We don't say words that in a distinct manner, like in the South, the way that they would pronounce a word. We just pronounce it very neutrally, and that's actually why people from our area you'll see on local weather station channels or news channels throughout the country, because their neutrality allows them to be understood by anyone listening. You can't have somebody who's like from Appalachia, deep Appalachia, get up and like try and tell the weather. No one's going to understand a word they're saying. Did you ever see that show called Gold? What is it called? Gold Rush or whatever? God, what was it called? It's a reality TV show. It's about these group of guys who are up in Alaska. They're trying to get gold. Well, there's the one guy who's Dutch actually, and I could not understand a word coming out of that man's mouth. He had a very thick, I believe he was Dutch.
Oh, isn't that, what's it called again? Dukes? No. Um, damn, I think I know which show you mean, but I can't get the name. I just
Yeah.
can't get the name.
It was I think it was called Gold Rush. It was on I used to watch it years ago. It's like a classic, just where they have melodrama over stuff. But they had to actually put in subtitles for the Dutch guy, because it's just like nobody's going to understand what he's saying. And so I just that's why different certain
at
accents
least,
do not do well.
At least you're not making the mistake to think that the Netherlands is in Scandinavia. That happened to me like 3 times already. It's like, oh, by the way, Scandinavia. You're from Scandinavia, right? And
No.
I'm like, no.
No.
But it's like 3 times by 3 different people. I'm like, what? I'm not blonde.
Yeah, that's what I also find fascinating is a lot of people do not know their geography. Like Scandinavia is Sweden, Norway, and Denmark.
I think the Lego is what's putting
no,
them
yeah,
off. It has to be Denmark.
Yeah.
No.
Which is funny how the going back to the Song of Wulfgar, it's an interesting story because people, I didn't even think about this, but the Helvetii was if you read the book, it's about a tribe known as the Helvetii. In real life, they were a Celtic tribe from like around the Switzerland area or whatever, and I kind of came up with this idea. They mostly got wiped out by the Romans when they were trying to migrate into Roman territory by Julius Caesar. So that reference to the Roman butcher was Julius Caesar. So the tribe that I envisioned was like one that didn't leave, survived, and became more Germanic. But I wrote the story as if it was this tribe was from the Scandinavian area. So all these different, Germanic tribes are being mentioned that really weren't anywhere near some of these people. But there was so much migration going on. But what I really liked, what really came out well, is that you didn't pronounce a lot of these tribes' names the way that an American would. So it like helped lend to like as if it was being told by someone from that, even though you're not from Scandinavia. The fact that you didn't pronounce a lot of these words with the way I would in America is one of the reasons why that's why I couldn't do it I wouldn't have done the narration myself. I just have way too neutral of an accent. I think with certain stories, you got to have the voice has to have its own character, like as if it's being told by someone who has it's like part of their culture or something like that. And I thought and so this will kind of get into what I'm curious about, because you told it as if it was like some sort of, the way you told it, it was like some family tale. And so I'm curious, when I sent you this over and you read it over, like how did you prepare for doing the narration, as far as like reading it over and trying to get the pacing and all that kind of stuff? Because I think most people who are listening to audiobooks, they don't realize the amount of preparation that goes into doing a few paragraphs.
Well, the main thought I kept in my head was Lord of the Rings. And as a kid, I was a huge Lord of the Rings nerd. I still am a bit, but I mean, after 100 times, it gets old. But I used to, as a kid, probably watch those movies every week. It was funny. Insane. I really love it. It was escapism for me as well, because I really didn't like the real world when I was younger. But I kept in mind, like, how did Galadriel do the opening of the Fellowship of the Ring? It was well paced, it was soothing, and it was calm. And there's an interview with Ian McKellen as well, and he says, like, a proper actor and a proper narrator needs to get the pacing. He needs to know when he gets to bombastic and he tells you, and he needs to impress something upon you, and needs to be serious, and you need to get that it's very, very important for you to know. But he also needs to know when he is trying to just express something that you need to think about, things like that. But when Ian does it, he gets very bombastic with it. And especially, he plays Gandalf, and especially with that Bilbo scene where he needs Bilbo to understand that he's not trying to rob you,
Right.
trying to help. But that shift in pronunciation and message, especially, is what I had in mind. Like, okay, what is this part? This is a true narration part. This is not a character part. So what do you want to do with narration? You want to make the listener aware of what's going on in the surroundings and the pacing of the story. I thought that the actual description of what's happening in the story is not a moment for fast pacing or enthusiasm or whatsoever. That is a part that you want to do calmly and as clear as possible. So that's what I mostly had in my head. Like, how, if this were the Lord of the Rings, how would it have sounded?
Yeah, I think it didn't occur to me at the time, but now I think what really made it work is that despite the fact that originally I thought, and maybe it's just me, I had this picture in my head of you being older. You're roughly my age, so around your 30s, but it's a story about a young man told by someone roughly his age. So I feel like that's also it would have probably been very different if it had been someone much older telling the story. So I think that's also what just the response I've gotten from people has been overwhelmingly positive to both the story and the narration. And so I was trying to think of like what made this click so well, because I gave you some I sent over that link of Seamus Heaney's reading of Beowulf, but he did it a little bit differently. He sounded more like a guy who had been there for all that stuff. Like he'd actually seen it all. Like he was that old. And you did a different pacing, which, it's a different story and that kind of stuff like that. So I guess what was there was the other stuff that you had to do was because I was watching that one live stream you did where you were showing how you were working on it. And was there any parts where you just like you had to keep doing again and again and again to try and get it right because it was so hard?
Probably there was, but I can't remember, to be honest, because there are so many times I F it up where it's like, okay, never mind, rewind, go back, cut it out, do it again. But also parts where I listen back to it, I'm like, no, it doesn't get the message across. Like, and you have to excuse me, TJ. I mean, I love the story, but the names didn't all stick. But I do remember the evil witch, which Wulfgar defeats with the reflection in the shield, and she's guarding the gold, kind of like the dragon sitting on the gold reference there. But I do remember that I did want to narrate her in a way that gets the message across that this is evil. This is really purely an evil hag, that whatever perspective you look at it from, she is evil. And I do remember a part where I was like, nah, this isn't evil enough.
You're not quite evil enough, right?
No. I know you wanted to ask it, like what things do you really like to narrate, or if there was one thing. I would have always loved to be able to do a young Tywin Lannister. That would just be, I would have a field day with that. A character like that, like so calm, calculating, and uncaring for anything but the end goal.
Yeah.
To be able to get that across. I would have just loved that. Especially because, well, first of all, I think he is the best character in that entire series. Even though, I mean, they screwed up the ending, and when you look back at it, it isn't even that greatly written, to be very honest. Like Game of Thrones isn't really that greatly written. It's mostly spectacle above everything.
Yeah, it's interesting how people. Somebody noted a while ago, Tolkien had fought in World War I. He saw a lot of very bad stuff, but he came out and wrote this very beautiful world of Middle Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, this one guy, George, whatever his name is,
Mm-hmm.
the author of Game of Thrones, he doesn't see any of that stuff, but he creates a world that's just it's. I watched like one or two episodes, and I just found that it wasn't well written or whatever. And that I know that there's the books as well, but it's just imagine trying to narrate those kind of books. Like you almost would have to have a bottle of whiskey with you.
I mean, there are so many characters. There's so many things going on. There's so much in between and everything. It's okay. It's a story that hangs together by the epic moments. And I think that's what Lord of the Rings and Wulfgar have in common, is that it's not about the epic moments. It's what gets you to stick with it. And this sounds very cliche, but it's the journey towards it. It's the build-up. Like, it's gonna go somewhere, but where is it going? And this is why Lord of the Rings works so well, I guess, too. Because the Battle of Helm's Deep is being built up for an entire movie. And that battle would not have worked without that build-up. Now, when you look at Game of Thrones and things like that, everybody remembers the epic moments. But when you ask about everything leading up to it, it's kind of like, oh, meh. And that's a modern day thing. It really is a modern day thing. You see that in all sorts of media.
I think it's also because, and this is something I was very cognizant of when I was writing this book, is it's not the big moments in a story. It's the little vignettes, the little tiny things that just speak to either something in the reader or something in the character that you're reading about, where that's what it's about, the people in the story. And I wrote this story. There was a lot of different inspirations, but when I finally started writing the story, and I was thinking about, how am I gonna, I didn't want to copy. The thing is, I'm going to end up having stuff that's similar to other stories. So if you look at Beowulf and some of these Icelandic tales, there's going to be some similarities. You just cannot avoid them. There's too much good stuff that I needed to use. Every story involves a guy offering some other guy his sword. So it's just like, okay, I'm just going to run with it. But what I wanted to do differently was make it specifically about a young man rising to the challenge and being rather assertive and bold, but not for his own personal sake, but because he's just like that kind of a hero. And this is a mythological tale. It's not meant to be where I'm not writing a story about a historical figure where it's like, oh, he doesn't have any flaws. It's like, he doesn't have flaws, but he has struggles. He struggles with, balancing out, should I pursue ambition? Like, he refrains from wanting to go kill the monster. He's just like, that's because the title of kingship has been offered. And he's very cautious about that. His main concern is just finding a new home for his tribe because they've had to flee their homeland. And he's gone through all those experiences that they've, the Odyssey across the water and all these other things. So that's what's driving him. And what I also was worried about at the same time was not having a character who was over the top, where he's so he's too good. Like he's almost like a Superman character where there's just what exactly does he struggle with? And so I guess since we're talking about Wulfgar, who's the main character featured, tell me a little bit about developing his voice, like what he would sound like, and then after that, I'm curious how you came up with the voice for Wandamar, because you were mentioning Gandalf before, but Wandamar doesn't sound like Gandalf there's that same sort of like aged wisdom
Mhm.
quality, but you did a very good job of not making him sound just like Gandalf, which there's a lot of similarities between the two characters.
Yeah, well, but there's also a very big difference. And that was the mythicality about them. Because when you look at Gandalf, I mean, Gandalf is a wizard, but he's not very mythical. He's not the very stereotype wizard. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when I read about Vandergal, I imagined a shorter person, stereotypical Dungeons and Dragons wizard, like the Dungeons and Dragons wizard in the old '80s cartoon,
Yeah.
or the ancient sage that helped He-Man. I really had the '80s in my head as well when it came to him. So he had a mentor kind of part like Gandalf and Obi-Wan, but also more of the accessible '80s cartoons.
Yeah.
So it was a mix between them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's like with some wizards tend to be, or in some stories they tend to be very not standoffish, but like you said, their humanity is not known. They're almost more like some angel who's visiting you, proclaiming something and then withdrawing, but like you don't know anything about them personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're there to it's like with kind of like with Gandalf. I mean, he's got his own personality traits. He loves smoking his pipe. He loves going on adventures. Like he's a personable. He develops friendships, and that's kind
He's
of what
not just magic.
Yeah.
Let's go to Gandalf in his magic kettle.
Yeah.
Like he only has his kettle and he stirs in that, and that's it. That makes him a wizard.
The other thing about Gandalf is his magic tends to be more what do you call it, pragmatic, or like for example when they're in the mines of Moria and they've been buried alive, basically he lights up his staff, and then that's kind of his magic. But when it comes to combat, he very rarely uses his magic in combat. It's only when like nothing else is going to work here, for the
mostly because he's not allowed. I don't know if you know the lore of the Lord of the Rings, like the Silmarillion and the things like that, but he isn't allowed to do it unless under very, very dire circumstances.
So like rules of engagement, yeah,
because he is one of the sent agents of what's his name again, Iluvatar, I believe, like the god of Middle Earth.
Yeah, and so with Wandamar, what was, you saw him as like a kind of, so in comparison to Gandalf, what were some of the differences that led to developing a voice that was, one of the things I noted about Wandamar is he's very calm. You made him very calm. He's almost like this guy who's like, I've been here, I've seen it, because he is old. He's like 900 years old or something like that in the story. And yet he's not doing, I am not trying to, like, he doesn't do any of those very assertive moments, because it's almost like he doesn't have to, or like, what was your thinking for that?
I mean, Wandamar is 900 years old. I mean, he has probably seen it all. He has been there, and he knows that being loud and obnoxious or whatever doesn't get the point across. Like, most people will look for the calm and reasonable voice. And I mean, I'm 29 and I know that. That guy's 900. I mean, we think we have seen shit. Think about that guy. Like, he doesn't want to be bothered with trivial pursuit, so to say.
He's also, it's the other thing that's interesting is he's had his people completely wiped out. He's the last of his kind. And that actually was inspired by, I cannot remember what part of Beowulf it was, but there's this anecdote in the story where there's this last member of a tribe. It's only him, and it's like he knows all of his tribe's history, its legends, its myths, its stories. But when he dies, it all goes with him. And I thought there was kind of a poetic tragedy about that, where you're the last of your kind, but that makes you different. That it's almost like a mark of distinction in a way, because you have you have something that no one else has. So this character has that, in contrast with Wulfgar, where he's trying to keep his people safe from essentially genocide. And so he's trying to prevent that from happening to his people. And so he's young and he's very assertive at times. And so it's interesting, the contrast. I didn't even think about this, but the contrast with Wandamar being this 900-year-old, very calm guy, and Wulfgar's this very, once more onto the breach. We've just slain a bunch of trolls. Now we need to go up and go kill the rest of them. Who's with me? And the older guys are like, yeah, we need to take a breather. Yeah, and it's the young one who wants to come on.
I think that with Song of Wulfgar, you perfectly sketched the burden of performance in a scenario. Like, what is the burden of performance? Well, go read or preferably listen to Song of Wulfgar. That's it. Like, you don't do it because you want to. You do it because you have to. Because, I mean, what happens when you let an enemy go? I mean, and you've probably seen these memes going around, like Theoden, Uruk-hais are at the gate. Yeah. Well, let them in then. Uruk-hai lives matter, or Sauron phobe, or whatever. They
say, well, don't be racist. Let them in.
Yeah. Like thousands of orcs are now suffering under Aragorn's rule because of the end of Sauron and blah, blah, blah. But it really is like that. Like, you cannot let an orc live. An orc does not care about a human life. It just doesn't. And an orc does not care about the beauty of life. It cares about filth and what it's going to eat next. And that's it. And when you've just slain a couple of its brethren, it already sees you as the enemy. So what's going to happen? It's going to gather around all the other orcs and probably try to kill you, because it's instinct. You cannot reason with instinct. And I think Wulfgar knows that very well, and the job needs to get done. Like, no rest for the wicked. Although Wulfgar isn't wicked, but he knows what needs to happen. And he knows that the elderly are, well, tired. So, and I don't know how much I can go into spoilers, but he goes with his one friend into the cave.
Yeah. So for people who haven't read the book and haven't done a lot of research, which you should have read the book. You get the book. It's set in the Enchantments, which is an actual location in the Pacific Northwest. It's located within hiking distance of my where I live. And I've been to most of it, but not to. I'm planning to make my pilgrimage to Prusik Peak, which is featured on the cover of my book. And so I was curious, did you study any of the photos of the enchantments to kind of get this idea? Because part of what inspired me to write this story is my family members and we hiked up Dragon Tail Peak, which is an actual location in the enchantments. And I was looking across this place and I just thought, this is a Tolkien novel setting if there ever was one. Like, you could film a battle scene here and you wouldn't have to use any CG. Like, you wouldn't have to change the landscape is perfect. And there were other inspirations as well that later led to that, but it was just the visuals of, like, it seemed like it was a legitimate movie set had been built there for a Lord of the Rings style film. And all the names lent itself. Asgard Pass, Dragon Tail Peak, the temple. There all these different mythical names. And incidentally, the actual technical name for Asgard Pass is actually Kolchak Pass. But nobody wants to climb up Kolchak Pass. Everybody wants to climb up Asgard Pass, right? So, yeah, to go back to the question, how much did you look at that stuff, and what was your reaction to what you saw?
Well, that's where I got the idea for narration, because I saw the pictures, and there are dozens of movies that I saw that start out with the widescreen shot over the mountains, and have this soothing soothing, educated narration over it. Like the old wise gentleman will lead you through the story. Now, so I got that in my head. Like, that's the voice I want. The overarching voice that takes you along this journey. Because I've seen so many film intros like that, and I saw the pictures, and I immediately knew, like, okay, that's it. Like, and then you sent me the segment of Beowulf, and it clicked. It just clicked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a part of the book was pretty, like, I knew there was going to be there had to be a battle at Asgard Pass. Like the Battle of Asgard Pass. Like that is that sounds like something out of an actual I studied a little bit of Norse mythology, not to like use any of that stuff, but just to get a feel for like what, I wanted this tribe to have those religious beliefs just because it wouldn't have made sense for them to be anything other than that at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, what's the cultural mindset? And so, obviously you were actually mentioning the burden of performance. And this is something that gets lost on men today, is that we live in, regardless of what's going on in the geopolitical world right now, at this particular moment in time, we are living in a very unusually peaceful, nonviolent era. Whereas, so in the Seattle area, there's this, it's called the Pacific Northwest Freeze. It's where people are not very friendly. They're polite, but they're just not very warm to you. And some people were trying to come up with different ways of just like explaining that. And interestingly enough, one of the explanations or theories was that it's developed from Scandinavian culture, where if a stranger was approaching, you had no idea what their, if you lived in a rural part of Scandinavia is pretty rural countries. If you saw a stranger approaching, you had no idea what their intent was. And this is, at times before there was law enforcement, before there was essentially the monopoly on basically violence, it was really like no one was coming. Like if you were going to survive, you had to be very ruthless. You had to be ruthless towards your enemies. Men had this much more of this not dichotomy, but you would be ruthless and brutal towards your enemies, but you would be very generous, kind-hearted, and tender towards your own family, like your little ones, whatever. I think that I was reading, not to get too off track, but I was reading some of the letters that these kamikaze pilots, the Japanese pilots who were going to, basically drive their planes into the side of a U.S. battleship, or they were basically in desperation to win the war. And they wrote these very emotionally moving letters to their family, like telling their parents how much they appreciated the way they raised them, how they, want to honor them and not shame them, and how they want to die for their country. Like this was clearly men who were not, like, they were not monsters the way that we often portray people. This is the dichotomy that we see in men, is that we can be vicious and brutal to people who are outside of our group, but in our group we can be that way. And so that goes back to with Wulfgar, and I understand there's no human enemies they're fighting in this story. That's kind of a beside the point, because I wasn't going to put in Beowulf they actually have humans fighting humans, and Icelandic Tales they have the same thing. I didn't want to do that because I wanted this to be clearly two things, other than the beginning of the book, where these fighting different tribes. I didn't want people to get confused with this being somehow allegorical. Like this is not an somebody was asking me like, what is there any parallels or anything? No, I just wrote this. This is like Tolkien writing Lord of the Rings. Like there is no deeper meaning to the book in terms of like, what is the author trying to say? It's not trying to say anything. It's like Quintus Curtius's baboon by moonlight painting. Like, what's the deeper meaning? There is. I don't. Have you seen that?
Not yet.
Oh, Quintus, you can see it on Vince has a painting, has his painting now on his wall.
Nice.
But it's just a baboon sitting on a tree in the moonlight. And, Quintus Curtius, who's this historian and writer and attorney, he gets asked these questions by people like, what does it mean? What is the deeper meaning? There is no deeper meaning. It's a baboon sitting on a tree by moonlight. Like, it's just
just enjoy the picture. Enjoy the beauty of it. This is an animal in nature. Done.
Right. And so I wrote the Song of Wulfgar to be just a tale. Like, I wanted to write a modern day legend for a 21st century audience. So it's going to be much more streamlined than some of the other stories, and it's going to just get to the point. It's not going to belabor it. So because it's not very long. It's and unlike Beowulf, it doesn't go off on like these weird tangents that I'm just like, what does this have to do with the rest of the story? So I guess kind of to switch to a different related topic with narration is the noise. How much outside noise problems do you have? Because you live next to a street, right?
Yeah, I live next to a street. When I close the windows, it's okay. Close the curtains. But like when a garbage truck comes by, that's when it gets annoying, or when the church goes off. Now, luckily, I get up real early, and most of the recordings I did in the weekend or on my one day off during the week. So if I timed it right, I had a couple of hours of doing it and editing so that the garbage truck there it goes, motorcycle. But now I have the windows open. But I beat the garbage truck either to it or he would have already passed by. But sometimes some children would walk by or things like that, and then you have to do it over again. Or you kick your foot against whatever is lying under the desk, and you have to do it again. Or you name something. You push something over. But other than the church and the garbage truck, perfectly doable. Very doable.
Yeah.
As long as I close the windows and the curtains.
Gotcha.
And something else I noticed is that's when I bought the boom handle, by the way. First Genomics audiobook, I still had the Yeti on the stand. On the standing on your desk stand. But I noticed that when I have my head up like this, my voice is way clearer instead of when I do it like this, like with my face down. It's very nasal. Like this, far more clear space or whatever, pronunciation space. So that's something else I did with the mic, have it more up instead of down.
Yeah, it almost makes, because I have my mic still on a stand, but what it forces me to do is lean down as opposed to the mic being up, so that you're going to draw more of a complete breath while you're reciting something or narrating. That's one of the things not because I'm planning on narrating stuff, but I've just realized how much vocal control and breathing, how important it is to just regular stuff in life. But definitely with reciting a book, because you don't want to read a book and recite a book. People are listening to it and like, this guy sounds like he's running out of air. He's like, and then like, you can do that. Like if you're doing a radio show, like an old time radio show, like I was writing and I couldn't, but if you're reading a book, you can't really do that.
Sometimes that was tough though, because during the longer narration sentences, you have to catch your breath and just like, and then go back. But luckily, I mean, I have the tapping mouse pad. So when I really needed to do that, I just paused, got back in, and continue. I mean, Audacity is a great program.
Yeah, I haven't used Audacity. I'm probably going to start doing my podcasts through StreamYard. I was using Goldwave, not to record. I was using voice recorder. I don't know if it's my computer or my microphone, but the quality has varied too great. So I might look at Audacity as well. We'll see what's going on with that. So I guess for you, when did you start getting in to talk more about like your own personal work? What got you into narration to begin with? And was there ever a point when people were noting that you had a voice for narration? Like what was the earliest that you ever heard that?
Well, I have to give John from Modern Life Dating credit for that, because my second YouTube video was a review of The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene. And that was together with him. And we ended it, and he's like, "Kid, you ever thought of narration?" I'm like, "Huh?" He's like, "You have a great voice." I'm like, "Oh, I never noticed." And then I noticed that Carl from Black Label Logic, who wrote Gendernomics, did not have an audiobook. So what I did, record the first chapter or the introduction even. I just recorded that and I sent it to it. Like, what do you think? He's like, "Do it." I'm like, "Oh, cool. I can actually do this." So I just started recording the whole damn thing and I sent it over to him. Like, "Okay, what do you want to do now?" He's like, "Well, publish it." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, publish it. It's yours. You have my permission."
Wow.
Like, oh, wow.
That's pretty
And
cool.
same thing with the second one. Yeah, we did the same thing. Goldman from Goldman Unleashed. I did the introduction of Go Forth, and he's like, "Whoa, I'd love to," and it's on his website right now on Goldman.com, I believe. And I did. I'm working on the Book of Puck, but that's mostly for my patrons or subscribers on Subscribestar, because we are banishing Patreon right now.
Yeah. Patreon.
And I don't know, yeah, like John got me into it, and other people said it as well. Like, "Yeah, you have a great voice." And then I got in contact with Rob, and then I got to Masculine Geek, and that's where you and I connected more. And you asked me for the Song of Wulfgar, and that's how that happened.
Yeah, that was I'm really, because I was quite sure. I was like, is he going to be interested in doing this? Because it was very different from the other stuff that you had done. And to be honest, I really didn't know how people. Very few. I don't think anybody had actually read the book other than me. I just written it. I had been going over it, and I felt like the audiobook is really, people. If I think it's a great book of poetry to buy as a physical copy. I have a physical copy, and I'm really happy with the quality of the like the paper and the cover art. Cover artist did a great job. But it's almost like it's incomplete without the audiobook. Like that's where the real soul, it's where it came from. And so when you were willing to do it, and then it came out the way it did, and you obviously had enjoyed narrating it. So it was kind of like, for me, it's like, okay, this is my first initial response I'm getting from someone else on this stuff, because I don't know of anybody of any. One of the things that worried me about it is this is a somewhat eclectic or unique type book, because it's not written like a regular story. It's written in like an old-fashioned poem, like
I just wish more guys would do it, because in our little sphere, there's a lot of talk about modern media sucks. Yeah, we know. Go create your own.
Exactly.
And then you come in and you create this. And I'm like, I am still waiting for the guy who makes like an awesome 90s cartoon and wants me to be the villain. Like, you have a British enough sounding voice, and we couldn't get Troy Francis. So Napier, you're up. Yes.
Right.
But no.
Yeah. If you want a villain, he has to have there's a reason why all the Imperial Army or the Imperial forces in Star Wars all have British accents.
Yeah. General Moff. No, Tarkin.
Well, Tarkin, but there's also the
Leia who tries.
Well, no, General Veers, who was also in The Last Crusade. He's the commander at Hoth. He was also, and then there was all the commanders are British. They're very kind of aristocratic. Meanwhile, the rebels are the rebels are all like Americans. There's no.
You know what, that works because it was true. Like, America was founded on a couple of assholes who flipped the bird. Like, we don't agree with you, George. Fuck off.
Yeah.
Or who was the king of England back then?
King George III.
Yeah, George. Yeah, like, fuck you, George. We're not doing this. We're gonna create our own land. Bye.
Yeah, it's funny how that narration matched, and I think that's why the film was popular, is because it really matched a lot of um, the comparisons to our War of Independence, because the rebels are America are these very desperate group of people with American accents, and there's kind of like this um, technical hierarchy by rank, but not by like cultural class.
Mm-hmm.
Like Leia's a princess, but she's not like, it doesn't mean anything really.
No.
People aren't bowing or saying your royal. And the only person who says your royal highness is Han, and he's being sarcastic.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean that's
your
great.
worshipfulness. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and then meanwhile the imperial, it's like very much about presentation and about comportment and not failing and all that other stuff. But yeah, that's been one of my biggest frustrations is I'm past this point where I understand that modern media and content is not good and it's going to continue going downhill. So my thought, and that's what one of the things that inspired me to do this, is because no one else is going to do this. And also there's this very anti-hero um, kind of campaign within stories. Like if you look at some of the new movies that come out, the they're they're really not, they're interested in being like destroying the hero. Like the new Star Wars films, in my opinion, was an attack the on the like, look at all the heroes from the original Star Wars. They all become these losers or kind of fallen characters by the new trilogy, you
I
know.
mean, let's not um let's not tie ribbons around it or whatever the phrase is. It's all make room for her.
Yeah,
And I mean, I don't even think it has to do with any ideology. I truly think it has to do with consumerism because the majority of the market is determined by women. So,
right.
what sells the best right now? To women. So, who do you want to pander to? Women. And like,
It's and that's what's also one of the things with Song of Wulfgar that I with stories that I've always been attracted to, is it's a story about a young man, earning the admiration of the other men around him, where he's
yeah,
doing things that are masculine. There's no chivalry in this story. There's not really any kind of traditional romance. He's not trying to rescue a fair maiden. Um, it's a very straightforward. I saw it as being kind of the pure European mythology before like the courtly love corruption of
yeah,
the military code. I mean, if you
I,
look at the Song of Roland was actually one of the inspirations for this as well. That was about a Frankish commander who was killed during a last stand. He was under Charlemagne, and the story, it's a pretty long one, but it's what struck me is like it's about chivalry, but it's all about his duty to the Franks, to France, to Charlemagne. It's a warrior's code, it's a warrior's ethos, and so it has that. And I wanted something that was going to be more accessible for men today, where they're not going to read like Song of Roland. Just doesn't. It's too. You can listen to it. It's 4 hours long, but it's wrapped up at. It's written from that time period. Whereas I'm trying to write an old-fashioned tale for a modern audience, and in a prose that they're going to be able to access and understand.
Mhm.
So I don't get too deep into some of that stuff. But yeah, it's I want, my hope would be that a young 15-year-old hears this story or 10-year-old hears this story and gets inspired to go do something brave in his life. Like that one kid who beat off a dog who was attacking his sister, right?
Oh yeah, that
Yeah,
kid.
like that's the kind of like stuff that the kind of courage we need more of today. Where he wasn't running to get his mommy or dad. He wasn't screaming for his parents. He just went and just beat. Took
Yeah,
the beating.
like I am the only one here to protect her. This is
And
my duty. This
and
is what I have to do. I mean, it's being frowned upon so much. And I don't understand why you're more popular or the book is more popular. Guys, here it is. Here's the media you want.
Well,
Here is the story you want.
Let's be honest. There's what men say, and then there's what men and people. But
Yeah, I mean, a
specifically,
lot of men have become feminized, and it's easily to see in the results.
well, it's easier to complain than to actually do something.
Oh yeah,
And I think that it's. I think that they almost have this attitude of if we're going to get new content, it's got to come through the appropriate channels. Like we can only watch films that are from Hollywood. We can only watch TV shows that are on Netflix and HBO. We can only read books that have been recognized. Like this idea of like doing an underground movement.
We can only do professions we went to college for. Like,
yeah, it's this weird mind, and I think it's kind of just scary because it's entering unknown territory. I mean, where we're just publishing our own work. We're because then you start to detach yourself from me. I mean, what is some of the reasons people watch like stuff? I think one of the theories I have is they watch football, professional sports, they watch HBO, Netflix, so that they have something in common with the average person that they interact with.
yes,
if you don't watch that stuff. There's been times when I was the only person not watching a TV show, and that's all they wanted to talk about. And so you're kind of going to be off in the corner doing your own thing because you've got nothing to say. And if you don't like the show, then you really aren't going to have anything to say.
no, then you fall. Then you're out. You're outside of the group. But I think it's living vicariously as well. Oh, by the way, can you see the private chat?
The private chat. 1 second. Oh, I did.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we can end this at around 9 a.m.
Oh,
or sorry, 8 minutes from now. Remember, you are not in the Pacific Northwest.
No, but I can calculate it through. Like I know, but I mean, it's vicariously living through. And how do I know that? Again, as a kid, nearly every week I watched Lord of the Rings. Those guys were way cooler than my real life and things like that. And this is the problem with guys who do video games too much or play Magic the Gathering too much. They are living vicariously through a device.
Yeah.
And when you stop doing that, you start looking at the real world in your real life, and you ask yourself, do I enjoy this? And the majority of the time, it's no. So what do you start doing? You either put in the work to get a new life, which is actually something you want, or you're going to live vicariously through like a Nintendo Switch or a Game Boy or a PlayStation or movies or soccer or football, you name it. Like these soccer riots, football riots. Why? Why do that? Because your team won. Like your team is not a representation of you. But for most people, it is because they have nothing else in their lives. Like having a role model is one thing, but imaging your life with that is just problematic.
Yeah, and I think that when I read stuff when I was a kid, I was always inspired to go do that in real life. So when I read about these, and even today I read about these guys who like George Mallory climbing Everest, or these other guys just doing these very difficult hikes. I'm inspired to go seek out difficult adventures and since I live in the mountains, that makes it easier. But I'm always pushing myself to do something that I want. Life is supposed to be an adventure, and you're supposed to have fun with it. And when you see something that you really like or you want to become, you can't just live it in a virtual world. You have to take it out into the real world. And so that's what, like, I would play video games, or I'd watch cartoons, and there's all these guys doing cool stuff. And I understand that some of that stuff is just beyond the realm of feasibility, but you come up with the best real life equivalent of that.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. The Legend of Zelda is amazing.
Yes.
As soon as that main theme kicks in, you know you're gonna have one hell of a time. But that same adventurous look on, same adventurous feeling can transfer to life in general. Because when you're conscious about it and you're like, okay, I played 1 hour, it's cool now. then you go outside and you're like, hey, why am I in such a boring life? And then you start looking at activities you can do. What's the word I'm looking for?
I'm looking for that word too.
Activities and like creating memories during events.
Yeah.
You're trying to aspire to create that because you know that the video game and everything is fictional, but that doesn't mean your life has to be boring. And I talked about this yesterday. For people who are wondering, I have a YouTube channel. You can look it up, Jack Napier, Red Evening, and you'll find me. That's the podcast, but I do solo videos as well. And one of my subscribers on Subscribestar asked me, like, Jack, what's your life's goal? And the only thing I can think of is not fuck up. Like, a lot of guys out there right now are falling for the, and I'm going to call it by its name, the get rich quick scheme of being the biggest alpha that ever alphaed. And I'm like, how about you stop being a loser first? And don't worry about being the biggest alpha that ever alpha, because a lot of guys have trouble with that as well. Like, how do you quit being a loser? Well, first of all, get a shitty job and maintain it for over a year. How about you start there? How about you start off paying everything off that you couldn't afford? That's the second one. Start saving, things like that, before you become Mr. Big Time Millionaire, because you're not there yet. Everybody's trying to outrun the bear instead of outrunning the guy that's next to
Yeah.
It always has to be big, bright, and beautiful. And I'm not saying don't play to win. I'm saying that comes after you start playing not to lose, if you know what I mean. Like, stop grabbing for the highest of the highest when you're still at the lowest of the lowest. Like, you still have an addiction to porn. Stop focusing on flipping houses, bro, or get my drop shipping course. No, stop being a loser first. Like, how does your daily life look like? Okay, for example, take me. Okay, mine's a bit extreme, but there's reason to my madness. I get up at 4 a.m. I enjoy it. I'm a morning person. Get my coffee, get my breakfast, go walk for an hour, hour and a half. Listen to podcasts, listen to ideas, write ideas down, whatever. At least I get my walk in, I get my exercise, yada, 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 yada. Why I do that at 4 a.m.? Because I start work at 8:30. So the entire morning is mine. When I get back home, I either shoot a video for the channel or I start recording for the Subscribestar guys for the Book of Puck, things like that. I do things. But after work, because in my opinion, the 9 to 5 is dead time. It really is. Like, you're filling up someone else's time with.
Yeah, that work slot or whatever it's called, like the amount of time that's actually spent doing productive work is
it's 20%. 20%.
Yeah. So,
but luckily, there's a lot of free content out there when it comes to PDF and books and things like that. So I try to make it productive either way. But I also want to learn skills. I've always said I want to be capable of violence, not violence. So I picked up kickboxing. I also think there needs to be a more tender side, if you know what I mean. It can be always aggressive and kicking ass and things like that. I picked up salsa dancing because I think that's pretty cool. Things like that. But a lot of guys out there are now flinching because they think to themselves, why are you doing so much? You're having a 9 to 5. You're doing kickboxing. You're doing salsa dancing. You're shooting videos. You're making audiobooks. Like, okay. Yet here you are buying courses on how to become Mr. Millionaire. Like, get your life in order first, people. And I know that sounds very Peterson-ish, but Peterson wasn't wrong when he said, clean your damn room first. Because a lot of guys don't even have that in order. Like, how do I get the girls? Well, are you fat? Maybe you want to start there, Mr. How do I get the girls? Because if you're fat, you can forget about that. Maybe you should ask yourself how to lose weight first.
Right.
And what I mean by this entire rant is like, start small and you get there. Instead of wanting to be the top 1% of the 1%. I mean, guys, they're the 1% for a very good reason. How about you try to get out of the bottom 20% first when it comes to life in general?
And you can start by buying the audiobook version of Song of Wulfgar and read about a man who is not a loser.
Bingo.
And then you can Jack, do you have a website where you have like links to the other books that you've narrated?
Are they on my website? Go to my Twitter. I know it's an anticlimax, but I always post them on Twitter. It's at Jack Napier Knows with a K. And there you will find the Gendernomics audiobook. And if you want Goldman's audiobook, you have to go to goldman.com because that is his that's his, how do I say that? It's his. Damn. My English is failing. What's the word? It's his property. It's his
intellectual property.
Thank you. It's his intellectual property. What a failure. I am a failure. I need to listen to Wulfgar again and not become a loser. But it is inspirational. Like, what does it mean to be a man? What is the burden of performance? Go listen to this book. We've heard people complaining about, we need new media because everything is feminized. Well, we delivered.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah. This is Captain America and what was that? Roger Stark? Is that his name? Or Tony Stark? Or what's the name of his dad?
What's Tony Stark? Oh, wow.
Howard Stark. Yeah.
Howard Stark.
Yeah. So it's Captain America and Howard Stark coming together for fighting for freedom, liberty,
masculinity,
all that other good stuff. So, well, this has been a great, a great and fun live stream, Jack. Thanks for jumping on. And those of you who are either listening or will be listening or should be listening, thank you for doing so. You can go to my website at tjmartinell.com. It has links to all my stuff, my books. If you are not subscribed to my newsletter, you can do so. I'm probably going to be making a migration off of a good chunk of social media, so that would be a good way to stay in touch with me. So, everyone, I guess I'll just, I'm usually not used to doing live stream closures. So I guess this is your host, TJ Martinell, coming to you from the war room of my fortress in the heart of Cascadia, signing off.
Bye.